The Omega waitress switched his cup in silence. The Alpha King realized she'd saved his life. Don't breathe. Don't look at his eyes. Just serve the wine and disappear. The whisper in Audelin's mind was a frantic rhythmic prayer, repeating in time with her racing heart. The heavy silver tray in her hands trembled, the crystal goblets clinking softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the cavernous silence of her own terror. The great hall of Ravenshore was not a dining room. It was a theater of war disguised with velvet drapes and the scent of roasted boar. It was filled with wolves wearing human skin, their smiles sharp, their laughter echoing like growls. At the head of the obsidian table sat Merrick Ravenshore, the Alpha King, a man whose reputation was carved from bone, blood, and the ruins of the North. He was laughing, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floorboards but didn't reach his predatory amber eyes. To his right, Duke Neville Crestgate smiled, his teeth too white, his hand hovering over the king's golden goblet with the grace of a striking viper. Audelin saw the powder fall, a dusting of white, finer than fresh snow, vanishing into the crimson vintage. Time fractured. The world slowed to a crawl. If she spoke, she died. If he drank, the kingdom burned. In the span of a heartbeat, amidst the roar of a toast, she moved, not as a servant, but as a phantom. She reached out, her rough fingers brushing the Alpha's cold, terrifying hand, and swapped his goblet with the pewter water chalice of the empty seat beside him. Silence fell. Absolute, suffocating silence. Merrick Ravenshore stopped laughing. He didn't look at the cup. He looked at her. The hierarchy of the Ravenshore pack was etched in stone, immutable and cruel. Alphas ruled with an iron fist, betas served with blind loyalty, and omegas. Omegas simply tried to survive the winter. Audelin Frostvale had learned the art of survival by erasing herself. She was a ghost in a stained gray apron, a forgotten daughter of a fallen winter pack, scrubbing floors until her knees bled and filling flagons until her arms screamed. Tonight was the equinox banquet, the most dangerous night of the year. The air in the great hall was thick, suffocating with the clashing scents of roasted venison, expensive imported perfumes, and the underlying metallic tang of suppressed violence. The chandeliers, massive structures of wrought iron and dripping crystal, cast a fractured kaleidoscope light over the gathered lords and ladies. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Every whisper felt like a conspiracy. Audelin kept her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the polished obsidian floor tiles that reflected the distortion of the feast above. She moved like a breeze, unnoticed, unwanted. "More wine, girl? Are you deaf as well as useless?" The voice was a hiss, sharp as a whip crack. Petronella Kingsfall, the head housekeeper, dug her bony fingers into the soft flesh of Audelin's upper arm. Petronella was a sharp-faced beta with eyes like flint and a soul that had curdled years ago. She took a perverse pleasure in the misery of those beneath her, especially Audelin, whose silent grace seemed to offend Petronella's very existence. "Yes, mistress," Audelin whispered, her voice rough and scraping from days of disuse. She didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only invited more pain. "Move," Petronella spat, shoving her forward. "The high table is dry. If the king's cup remains empty for even a second, I will have you sleeping in the kennels with the hounds." Audelin navigated the crowded hall, weaving through the chaotic energy of intoxicated shifters. The noise was a physical wall, roaring laughter, the clatter of silverware, the heavy thud of fists on tables. But as she neared the dais, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, charged with static. She was approaching the center of the universe, the place where gravity seemed to bend around one man, Merrick Ravenshore. Merrick was terrifyingly beautiful, a masterpiece of lethal intent. He didn't possess the bulky, brutish muscle of his generals, who looked like boulders wrapped in silk. No, the king was lean, built like a whipcord, with jet-black hair that fell in messy waves over a face that could stop a heart. His eyes were the color of burning whiskey, intelligent and unyielding. He radiated power, a sheer, crushing alpha pressure that made the fine hairs on Odolin's arms stand up from 30 feet away. It was an aura that demanded submission, a silent command that forced wolves to bare their throats. He was currently listening to Neville Crestgate, a man with the slippery charm of a viper and eyes that held no warmth. "The border disputes are settled, my king," Neville was saying, his voice smooth as oil, gesturing with a hand adorned with a heavy signet ring. "The southern packs have bent the knee to your health and to the eternal strength of Ravenshore." Odalind approached the table to refill the water jugs, her presence masking the tension. That was when she saw it. The movement was so subtle, so practiced, that no human eye would have caught it. But Odalind was not human, and her senses were honed by years of fear. Neville's ring had a hidden clasp. As he gestured broadly, a fine powder drifted down into the king's heavy golden goblet. It wasn't just poison. Odalind recognized the scent instantly, a phantom memory from her childhood in the apothecary gardens of the Frostvale Pack, before the fires and the screams. Nightshade and crushed silver, a mixture forbidden by the old laws. It was designed to lock a wolf in their human form, stripping them of their healing and stop their heart painfully, slowly, while they remained fully conscious of their own death. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest like an icicle. Her mind raced, calculating odds that were all zero. If she screamed, Neville, a powerful duke, would accuse her of madness or treason. If she knocked the cup over, she would be executed on the spot for assaulting the king. The toast was beginning. The hall was raising their glasses. Merrick was reaching for the stem of the goblet, his fingers closing around the gold. Odalind's body moved before her mind could catch up. It was instinct, the ancient ingrained drive of a healer, of a protector, resurfacing through the layers of fear. She stepped into the gap between the men. She didn't pour water. She didn't bow. With a fluidity that defied her station, she reached out. Her hand, red from scrubbing lye, covered Merrick's manicured hand. The contact was electric. A shockwave jolted through her, hot and jarring, and for a split second, the king froze. His skin was burning hot, a stark contrast to the ice in her veins. In that frozen second, she slid the poisoned goblet away and replaced it with the heavy pewter water chalice from the empty place setting of the late Lady Equestria Westhart. It was done. The switch was made. She stepped back, clutching her tray to her chest as a shield, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for the sky. Merrick didn't drink. He didn't move his hand from where she had touched him. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned his head. The entire hall seemed to dim, the noise fading into a dull roar in Odalind's ears. The Alpha King stared at her. He didn't look angry. He looked perplexed. Fascination warred with suspicion in his gaze. He lifted the water chalice to his nose, sniffed it once, and then his gaze snapped to the wine goblet she had moved. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring as the alpha senses took over. Neville, oblivious to the swap in the dim candlelight, raised his own glass high. "Drink, my lord, to victory, to a new era." Merrick's eyes never left Odalind's face. They were intelligent, dissecting her soul, peeling back the layers of her fear to see what lay beneath. He saw the terror, yes, but he also saw the defiance. He lifted the water chalice, the safe cup, and downed it in one long swallow, his throat working. "To victory," Merrick said softly, his voice a dangerous rumble that vibrated deep in Odalind's chest. He slammed the empty chalice down on the table with a sound like a gavel. "Get out." Odalind flinched, shrinking back, thinking he meant her. "Not you," Merrick growled, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist before she could flee. His grip was iron, inescapable. He looked at Neville, his smile transforming into a baring of fangs that promised violence. "Everyone else, get out." The command hit the room like a physical blow. The great hall emptied with the chaotic scramble of rats fleeing a sinking ship. Music died instantly, the musicians dropping their instruments in their haste. Lords and ladies, confused and frightened by the Alpha's sudden suffocating shift in aura, bowed hastily and retreated, their silks rustling like dry leaves. The heavy oak doors groaned shut, leaving only the echoes of the feast and the smell of cooling meat. Audlin stood paralyzed by the high table. Her wrist was still in Merrick's grip. His skin was incredibly hot, burning against her cool flesh, branding her. She could smell him now, rain, steel, and the deep earthy musk of a dominant wolf in his prime. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and terrifying. Neville Crestgate remained, looking uncertain, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. "My king? Is something amiss? The festivities—" "Sit down, Neville," Merrick commanded. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command was laced with alpha authority, a magical weight that forced the Duke's knees to buckle, dropping him heavily into his chair. Merrick finally released Audelind, but he gestured sharply for her to stay close, positioning her slightly behind him. He stood up, towering over the table, and picked up the golden goblet, the one with the poison. He swirled the dark liquid, watching the sediment dance. "You have a new supplier for the vintage, Neville?" Merrick asked, his voice conversational, though the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Yes, sire. From the southern vineyards. The best," Neville stammered, his eyes darting to the doors, gauging his escape. He glanced at Audelind, his eyes narrowing. He realized something was wrong with the tableau. Why was the servant girl still here? Why was the king holding the cup he should have drained? "It has a unique bouquet," Merrick said, pacing slowly around the table, the heels of his boots clicking rhythmically on the stone like a ticking clock. He stopped directly behind Neville. "It smells like ambition." Merrick placed the goblet in front of Neville. "Drink it." Audelind held her breath. The silence stretched, screaming in her ears. Neville's face went pale, draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. "Sire, I've already toasted with my own wine. It is improper." "I want you to taste this one," Merrick whispered, leaning down, his lips brushing Neville's ear. The intimacy was menacing. "Unless there is a reason you cannot?" Neville stared at the cup as if it contained a viper. He knew. He looked up, his eyes darting to Audelind. The realization dawned on him. The invisible Omega Waitress, the girl he hadn't even bothered to look at, had switched the cups. Pure, unadulterated hatred flared in his gaze, a promise of pain that made Audelind take a step back. I feel unwell, sire," Neville choked out, standing up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "My stomach, the rich food." Merrick's hand clamped onto Neville's shoulder, forcing him back down. Bones creaked. "Pity. It seems a waste." Suddenly, Merrick picked up the goblet and hurled it against the stone fireplace. The glass shattered with a violent crash, and the wine hissed as it hit the flames. It didn't just sizzle, it burned with an unnatural, sickly green flare. The scent of acrid chemicals and burnt silver filled the hall, making Audelind cough. "Silver and nightshade," Merrick announced, his voice turning icy, devoid of all emotion. "An elegant cocktail, Neville. Who gave it to you? Who wants me dead enough to use banned alchemy?" Neville didn't answer. He lunged. It happened in a blur of motion. Neville drew a dagger concealed in his velvet sleeve, the blade glinting in the firelight. He knew he couldn't beat an Alpha Prime in combat. Merrick would tear him apart, so he aimed for the weak link. He aimed for the witness. He lunged at Audelind. Audelind screamed, a sound she hadn't made in years, and threw herself backward. She tripped over the hem of her long gray skirts and hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of her. Neville was mid-air, the dagger descending, when a shadow intercepted him. Merrick moved with supernatural speed, a blur of darkness. He caught Neville by the throat mid-leap, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing more than a rag doll. "Bad move," Merrick snarled, his voice distorting into a growl. He threw Neville across the room. The traitor flew through the air and crashed into the high table, splintering the heavy oak wood and sending platters of food flying in a chaotic explosion of gravy and porcelain. The side doors burst open. Guards in black armor poured in, swords drawn, their boots thundering on the stone. "Take him to the black cells," Merrick ordered, not looking away from Neville's groaning form amidst the wreckage. "Bind him in iron. If he dies before I get answers, I will execute every guard on duty." As Neville was dragged away, shouting, dragged protestations of innocence that fooled no one, the silence returned to the hall. It was heavier now, laden with the knowledge of near death. Merrick turned slowly. He looked at the shattered goblet in the fireplace, then at the empty water chalice, and finally down at Odalind. She was still on the floor, trembling violently, her apron stained with spilled wine and grease. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He extended a hand toward her. "Stand up," he said. It wasn't a growl, it was a request, softer than anything she had heard from him. Odalind hesitated. Touching an alpha without permission was forbidden. Being helped by the king was unheard of. But the look in his eyes left no room for argument. She placed her shaking, work-worn hand in his large, warm one. He pulled her up with effortless strength, steadying her when she swayed. "You switched them," he stated. It wasn't a question. Odalind nodded once, eyes downcast, unable to meet his intense gaze. "Why?" She opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. Decades of silence, of being told she was worthless, had soldered her voice box shut. "Speak to me," he commanded softly, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space, his scent wrapping around her like a warm blanket, chasing away the chill of the hall. "You knew what was in the cup. You saved my life." "Why?" "Because," she rasped, her voice cracking, sounding foreign to her own ears. She took a breath and looked up, meeting his amber eyes. "Because a king should die on a battlefield, sword in hand, not at a dinner table, betrayed by a friend." Merrick stared at her for a long moment, a strange emotion flickering in his eyes, surprise, respect, and something hotter. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of her silver blonde hair behind her ear. His rough fingers lingered on her jawline, sending shivers down her spine. "What is your name, little savior?" "Odalind," she whispered. "Odalind Frostvale." Merrick's hand froze against her cheek. His eyes widened slightly. "Frostvale?" The main doors banged open again. This time, it wasn't guards. It was Petronella Kingsfall, looking furious and disheveled, followed by a tall, striking woman with flowing red hair and eyes like sharp emeralds, Lady Questria Westhart, the woman whose seat Odalind had stolen the chalice from. "There she is!" Petronella shrieked, pointing a bony finger at Odalind like an accusation. "The clumsy fool! She ruined the banquet! I'll have her whipped in the courtyard for this insolence!" Merrick didn't step away from Odalind. Instead, he shifted, placing his broad body between the waitress and the angry mob, shielding her from their view. "Touch her," Merrick said, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble that shook the crystals in the chandelier and vibrated in the teeth of everyone present, "and you lose the hand that does it." The king's quarters were not what Odalind expected. She had imagined a cave of trophies and weapons, a place cold, austere, and unyielding. Instead, the royal suite was a sanctuary. Walls lined with books stretched to the high ceiling, maps of the kingdom were spread across tables, and a roaring fire in the massive hearth kept the room in a perpetual golden twilight. It smelled of old paper, burning cedar, and him. Merrick had dragged her here immediately after the confrontation in the hall, ignoring the screeching protests of Petronella, the shocked gasps of Questria, and the urgent questions of his advisors. He had pulled her through the corridors, his grip firm but careful, as if she were made of glass. Now, he had locked the heavy oak door and was pacing the length of the room, running a hand through his hair. Odalind stood by the door, trying to merge with the shadows. She felt exposed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, seeping dread. She was an Omega. She was in the Alpha's private den. This scenario was the stuff of cautionary tales told in the kitchens. "Stop trying to disappear into the woodwork," Merrick said abruptly, stopping his pacing to look at her. He had removed his heavy ceremonial coat, tossing it onto a chair, revealing a white linen shirt that clung to his broad shoulders. He looked tired, the weight of the crown visible in the lines around his eyes. "I can hear your heart beating. It sounds like a hummingbird trapped in a jar." "I apologize, Your Majesty," Odalin murmured, curtsying awkwardly. "Stop apologizing." He walked over to a crystal sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He sniffed both exaggeratedly, shooting her a dark, dry look. "Safe, I promise. No silver, no nightshade." He walked over and handed her a glass. "Drink. It will settle your nerves." Odalin took it with shaking hands. She took a small sip. The brandy burned pleasantly on its way down, settling the nausea in her stomach. "Frostvale," Merrick said, testing the name on his tongue as if tasting it. He leaned against his mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "That pack was destroyed 15 years ago, during the Great Northern War. My father led the charge." "I know," Odalin said quietly, clutching the glass. "I was 5. I remember the smoke. And yet here you are, a survivor of a massacred enemy pack, serving wine in my hall." Merrick's eyes narrowed, analyzing the threat, calculating angles. "Did you save me so you could kill me yourself later? Is that the game? A long con?" Odalin looked up, surprised by the accusation, hurt flashing across her face. "No, I have no wish for death, yours or mine. I just wanted the killing to stop." "Then why intervene? Neville Crestgate would have made a puppet king of his nephew. The North would have fallen into chaos. Perhaps that would have been vengeance for your people." "Chaos feeds no one," Odalin said, finding a sudden spark of courage that she didn't know she possessed. "My people are dead, Your Majesty. Burning your kingdom won't bring them back. Besides," she hesitated, biting her lip. "Besides?" he urged, stepping closer. "You are not your father." Merrick went still. The air in the room shifted. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the gray dress and the stained apron. He saw the high cheekbones of the northern nobility, the stubborn set of her jaw, the intelligence in her pale blue eyes. "No," he said softly, a shadow passing over his face. "I am not." He set his glass down and closed the distance between them. This time, the intimidation was gone, replaced by an intense, burning curiosity. "You realized Neville was poisoning me. You smelled the nightshade. A human couldn't detect that. Even most betas couldn't discern it over the scent of the roast." He took a step closer, towering over her. "You're an Omega. Your senses shouldn't be that sharp. Unless—" He reached out, grabbing her chin gently, tilting her head back. He leaned in, inhaling the scent at the crook of her neck, right where her pulse hammered. Odalin gasped, her hands bunching in her skirt. It was an intimate, primal act, something reserved for mates. "Snowdrops," he murmured against her skin. "And ash." He pulled back, his eyes wide with realization. "You've been suppressing your scent, taking herbs to hide it?" Odalin nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "If they knew, if Petronella knew I was a high-blooded Omega, she would sell me to a breeding house. I had to be nothing. I had to be invisible." "You failed at that tonight," Merrick said, his voice low. "You are very visible now, Odalin." A heavy, pounding knock on the door shattered the moment. "Merrick!" It was Questria Westhart's voice, sharp, demanding, and full of entitlement. "Open this door! The council is in an uproar. Neville is screaming about a conspiracy involving the servant girl. They say she poisoned the cup." Merrick sighed, a heavy, weary sound that spoke of 1,000 such headaches. He looked at Odalin. "Neville is trying to spin the narrative. He'll claim you poisoned the cup and he tried to stop you. He needs a scapegoat, and a Frostvale orphan is the perfect villain." Odalin's blood ran cold. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the rug, but neither of them noticed. "They will believe a duke over a waitress." "Usually, yes," Merrick agreed grimly. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the latch. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable but fierce. But you are not just a waitress anymore. What am I? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Merrick unlocked the door. You are the only witness I trust, and until I root out the rest of the vipers in my court, you are my personal responsibility. He pulled the door open. Questria stood there, flanked by 2 guards, and Orion Whitvale, the captain of the guard. Questria's eyes darted past the king to Odalind, narrowing with jealousy and deep suspicion. What is she doing here, Merrick? Questria demanded, stepping forward. She should be in chains. She is a danger to the crown. She is under my protection, Merrick announced, his voice ringing with the Alpha command, silencing the murmurs in the hallway. She is now the royal cupbearer. No food or drink touches my lips unless she pours it. Unless she tastes it. Questria gasped, her hand flying to her throat. You cannot be serious. A northern stray? You would elevate a scrubber to the high table? A stray who saw what you did not, Merrick snapped, his patience snapping. He turned to Orion. Captain Whitvale, place a guard on Odalind's door tonight. If a hair on her head is harmed, if she so much as trips, I will hold you personally responsible. Orion, a stoic man with a scar running down his cheek and eyes that had seen too much war, bowed deeply. As you command, sire. Merrick turned back to Odalind. For a moment, the king and the waitress locked eyes across the room. In the midst of the brewing political storm, a silent pact was formed. Go with him, Merrick said softly, his eyes softening for just a second. Rest. Tomorrow, the hunt begins. Odalind curtsied, her legs shaking, and followed the captain out. As she passed Questria, the lady leaned in, her perfume cloying and sweet. Her voice was a venomous whisper meant only for Odalind. He may keep you as a pet for now, little wolf, Questria hissed, her emerald eyes flashing. But pets are disposable. Watch your back. Accidents happen in the dark. Odalind didn't reply. She kept her head high, clutching the memory of the king's hand on her face like a shield. She walked down the corridor, feeling the weight of the king's gaze on her back until she turned the corner. She had saved the king's life, but in doing so, she had painted a target on her own back. The game had changed. She was no longer invisible. And she had a feeling that the danger inside the Alpha's den was far greater and far more seductive than anything she had faced in the shadows. Dawn broke over Ravenshore Castle with the color of a bruise, deep purples and angry reds bleeding into the relentless gray stone of the northern stronghold. For Odalind, the sunrise brought no comfort, only the stark, blinding realization that her life of invisibility was irrevocably over. She had not slept. The guest chamber Merrick had assigned to her was lavish, a stark contrast to the servants' quarters. It was filled with silks the color of midnight and furs that cost more than her entire childhood pack had earned in a decade. But to Odalind, it felt like a gilded cage. Outside her heavy oak door, the rhythmic metallic tread of the royal guard was a constant reminder. She was protected, yes, but she was also a prisoner of circumstance. When the knock came, sharp and authoritative, it wasn't a servant bringing water. It was Captain Orion Whitvale. The king awaits his breakfast, Orion said through the door, his voice gravelly but not unkind. Odalind smoothed her simple gray dress. She had washed it in the basin and dried it by the fire, refusing the fine gowns the maids had tried to press upon her. She opened the door. I am ready. Walking through the corridors was a gauntlet. Servants who had once ignored her or shoved past her in the scullery now stopped dead, pressing themselves against the cold stone walls to let her pass. Some gazes were curious, filled with awe. Others were sharp with simmering resentment and jealousy. But when they reached the king's private dining solar, the atmosphere shifted from curious to lethal. Merrick was already seated at a small round table near the balcony, which overlooked the jagged cliffs and the churning sea below. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, illuminating the exhaustion that still clung to him like a second skin. He was reading a parchment, his brow furrowed in a dark scowl, but the moment Odalind stepped across the threshold, he looked up. His amber eyes locked onto hers with a gravitational pull that made her breath hitch in her throat. The intensity was physical, a weight against her chest. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the velvet chair opposite him. Odalyn froze, her hands gripping her skirts. "My lord, it is forbidden for a servant to sit with the Alpha. It violates the pack laws." "You are not a servant today, Odalind," Merrick said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with that terrifying Alpha timbre. "You are the only thing standing between me and another dose of nightshade. Sit." She sat on the very edge of the chair, her muscles coiled tight, ready to bolt. The table was laden with a feast, fresh fruits from the southern trade routes, roasted pheasant, warm bread steaming in the cool air, and a silver flagon of wine. "Eat," Merrick said, pushing a porcelain plate toward her. I'm to taste it, sire?" "Taste it. Eat it. Whatever you need to do to assure me that my own kitchen staff hasn't been bought by whoever holds Neville's leash." His eyes were dark, haunted by the betrayal of the previous night. Odalind reached for a slice of pear with trembling fingers. She wasn't afraid of the poison, she was afraid of the intimacy. Eating with an Alpha was a ritual of family, of pack, of mates. To do so with the king felt like a transgression of the highest order, a blasphemy against the caste system she had lived under for 15 years. She took a bite. The sweetness exploded on her tongue, but she forced herself to bypass the pleasure and focus on the chemistry. She chewed slowly, her eyes closing as she concentrated on the sensory input, dissecting the layers of flavor. No metallic tang, no bitter almond scent of cyanide, no magical residue of binding spells. "It is safe," she whispered, opening her eyes to find him watching her. Merrick didn't eat immediately. He was watching her lips, the way her throat moved when she swallowed. "You have a gift, Odalind. To identify a poison by scent alone, that is old magic, Frostveil magic." "My mother was the healer of our pack," Odalind admitted, her gaze dropping to the pristine white tablecloth. "She taught me the scent of every herb in the north before the fire." "The fire I ordered," Merrick finished, his voice devoid of pity, stating a cold, brutal fact. "The fire your father ordered," she corrected him gently, a spark of defiance lighting her chest. "You were a prince then. You followed orders. We all do what we must to survive. I scrubbed floors to stay alive. You burned villages to stay a prince." Merrick leaned forward, his intensity sudden and overwhelming. "And what are you doing now to survive, Odalind? Is this compliance or calculation?" "It is gratitude," she said, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "You saved me from the mob last night. I am repaying the debt." "The debt was mine," Merrick murmured. He reached out, taking a grape from the bowl she had just approved. He ate it slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, turning the act of eating into something predatory and possessive. "Neville is in the black cells. He has not spoken. He claims he is innocent, that you planted the poison to gain favor." "He lies," Odalind said, fear spiking in her chest like a shard of ice. "I know," Merrick assured her, his voice hardening. "But the court is a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more whisper in the shadows. Questria is rallying the council this very morning. She says I am bewitched by a northern stray. She says you are a sorceress who has ensnared my mind." "I am just an omega," Odalind said, her voice small. "You are not just anything." Merrick stood up abruptly, the movement violent enough to rattle the silverware. He walked to the balcony, gripping the stone railing until his knuckles turned white. "The investigation begins today. I need you with me." "With you? In the court?" "No," Merrick turned, a grim, wolfish smile playing on his lips. "In Neville's estate. We are going hunting, and you, little wolf, are going to be my bloodhound." Duke Neville Crestgate's estate was a monument to vanity and excess, located an hour's ride from the castle. Gold leaf covered the iron railings, and the gardens were manicured into unnatural geometric shapes that fought against the wild beauty of the north. But beneath the heavy perfume of blooming jasmine and imported roses, Odalind smelled rot. She walked a step behind Merrick, flanked by Captain Orion and a squad of elite guards in matte black armor. Merrick had insisted she wear a cloak of deep midnight blue, lined with silver fox fur, a garment far too fine for her station, which only fueled the confused whispers of the soldiers. "Stay close," Merrick murmured as they kicked open the double doors to Neville's private study. The room was tossed, papers scattered like confetti. The royal guard had already swept it for obvious evidence. "Tell me what they missed." Odalyn lowered her hood, her silver blonde hair spilling over the dark fur. She closed her eyes and inhaled. The room smelled of expensive cigar smoke, old leather, and Neville's cloying citrus cologne. But underneath that, there was something else, something faint, acrid, and terrifyingly familiar. She moved toward the heavy stone fireplace. It was cold, but the ashes smelled wrong. "Here," she whispered, her voice tight. Merrick was at her side instantly, his presence a wall of heat. "What is it?" "Burned paper," she said, crouching down on the expensive rug. She sifted through the soot with her bare fingers, ignoring the dirt that stained her skin. But not just paper. Parchment treated with, she brought a flake of ash to her nose. Arsenic, to ensure it burns completely and quickly. "He destroyed evidence," Orion grunted from the doorway, hand on the hilt of his sword. "We knew that." "No," Odalyn said, her eyes snapping open. "Wait." She crawled deeper into the hearth, reaching up into the blackened chimney. There was a loose brick, hidden by layers of soot. She felt a cold draft. With a grunt of effort, she pried it loose. Behind it lay a small velvet-wrapped bundle. Merrick took it from her, his fingers brushing hers. His touch sent a jolt of warmth through her cold hands, grounding her. He unwrapped the bundle on the mahogany desk. Inside was a vial of the silver powder, the nightshade mixture, and a letter, miraculously unburned. Merrick unfolded the letter. As he read, his face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His canines lengthened, snapping down over his lip. "What does it say?" Odalyn dared to ask, stepping closer to the ticking bomb that was the king. "It's not a letter from a conspirator," Merrick said, his voice ice, dropping to a dangerous growl. "It's a receipt, payment for the Northern Solution." He looked at Odalyn, and the pain in his eyes took her breath away. The payment was sent to a mercenary group, the White Fangs. Odalyn gasped, clutching the edge of the desk for support. The room spun. The White Fangs? They are myths. Rogues who hunt other wolves for sport, flesh peddlers. "They are real," Merrick said grimly, "and Neville hired them, but not to kill me." He turned the letter over. There was a postscript scrawled in hasty ink. "The king falls at the feast. The Omega is yours to take. Deliver her to the border. She is the last frost blood." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the unlit fire. "Me?" Odalyn whispered, horror washing over her like a freezing tide. "Why me?" Merrick slammed his fist onto the desk, cracking the solid wood down the middle. "Because you are a frost veil, because your bloodline carries the old magic, the healing blood. Neville didn't just want the throne, he wanted to sell you to the highest bidder to breed more healers, more weapons for foreign wars." He turned to her, and the ferocity in his eyes was terrifying, but it wasn't directed at her. It was a shield, a fortress of alpha rage built to protect her. "They were going to frame you for my death," Merrick realized aloud, pacing the room. "Kill the king, blame the northern servant, and then exile her into the hands of slavers. It was a perfect plan." "Until I switched the cup," Odalyn breathed, realizing the magnitude of what she had done. "Until you saved us both," Merrick corrected. He stepped closer, crowding her against the desk. He reached out, wiping a smudge of soot from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was impossibly tender for a man shaking with rage. "You are not safe here, Odalyn. Neville was just the buyer, the sellers, the White Fangs. They are still out there. And now that Neville has failed, they will come to collect their merchandise." "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I am alone." "No," Merrick growled, a low sound that vibrated in her bones. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "You are pack now, my pack, and I will burn the world down before I let them take you." For a moment, in the dusty silence of the traitor's study, the king and the Omega breathed the same air. The tension was electric, a pull so strong it frightened her more than the assassins. She wanted to lean into him, to bury her face in his chest and let him hold her. "Sire," Orion interrupted, his voice urgent, breaking the spell. "We must move. The sun is setting. The estate is not secure." Merrick pulled back, the mask of the king sliding back into place, but his eyes lingered on her lips for a fraction of a second too long. "Back to the castle," Merrick ordered. "Double the guard, and Adolin rides with me." The ride back to the castle was a blur of freezing rain and thundering hooves. Adolin sat in the carriage across from Merrick, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words and the terrifying realization of the target on her back. When they arrived, the castle courtyard was in chaos. Torches flared in the darkness and shouting men ran back and forth. "The prisoner!" a guard shouted, running into the courtyard as Merrick dismounted from the carriage. "Sire! The prisoner!" Merrick grabbed the guard by the breastplate, lifting him off his feet. "Speak!" "Neville Crestgate! He is dead, sire!" Merrick's roar of rage echoed off the wet stone walls. He stormed toward the dungeons, Adolin trailing in his wake like a shadow, refusing to be left behind. The black cells were damp and smelled of despair and mildew. In the cell meant for high treason, Neville Crestgate lay slumped against the stone wall. His face was purple, his eyes bulging in terror. "Poison?" Merrick demanded, kneeling beside the body, sniffing the air. "No, sire," the dungeon master said, trembling in the corner. His neck, it was snapped. Merrick examined the body. "Clean break. Professional. Who had access?" "Only the guards, sire. And Lady Questria. She came to gloat," she said. "She has high council clearance." Merrick stood up slowly. The air around him shimmered with heat. "Questria." "She is in the Great Hall, sire," Orion reported, breathless from running. "She has convened an emergency council. She claims the king is missing and the kingdom is vulnerable." "Get Adolin to my chambers," Merrick ordered, turning to Orion. "Lock her in. Trust no one." "No," Adolin said. Merrick spun around, his eyes flashing. "This is not a debate, Adolin." "He was killed to silence him," Adolin said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. "They know we went to his estate. They know we found the receipt. If you hide me away, they will think I am weak. They will think I am guilty. Questria will spin a story that I killed Neville to hide my crimes." "You are weak," Merrick snapped, fear for her life making him cruel. "You are an Omega against trained killers." "I am the one who smelled the poison when you did not," she countered, stepping into his space. "I am the one who found the letter. I am not a soldier, Merrick, but I am not useless. If Questria is behind this, she needs to see me standing beside you. She needs to see that I am not afraid." Merrick stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked at the dead man, then back at the girl in the velvet cloak. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in the ice of her eyes. He saw a queen, not a servant. "Fine," Merrick breathed, "but if you die, I will drag you back from the afterlife just to kill you myself for disobedience." He offered her his arm. "Walk with me, cupbearer." The great hall was somber. The festive tables were gone, replaced by a circle of chairs for the Council of Lords. Lady Questria sat near the front, dressed in mourning black that looked striking against her pale skin and flaming red hair. She looked the picture of grieving nobility, holding a lace handkerchief to dry eyes. When Merrick entered with Adolin on his arm, the room went deadly silent. "My lords," Merrick said, his voice booming like thunder, "we have a crisis. Duke Crestgate has been murdered in my custody." Questria stood up, her hand over her heart. "Murdered? Oh, the tragedy. Surely he took his own life out of shame." "His neck was snapped," Merrick said, staring directly at her, "by someone with alpha strength." Questria didn't flinch. "A terrible end for a traitor." "But Merrick, surely we must discuss the cause of this treason, the influence of outsiders?" Her eyes flicked to Adolin, filled with malice. "Adolin Frostvale is under my protection," Merrick warned, his hand tightening on Adolin's arm. "Is she?" Questria smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. Or is she the honey in the trap? My lords, I have received disturbing reports. The White Fang mercenaries have been spotted on our borders. They claim they are here to retrieve property stolen by the crown. Murmurs broke out among the lords. Fear rippled through the room. They claim, Questria continued, raising her voice to drown out the muttering, that the king is harboring a fugitive who belongs to them, a Frostvale witch who has enchanted our Alpha with dark potions. Lies! Odalin cried out, stepping forward, leaving the safety of Merrick's side. Neville hired them. We found the proof at his estate. Proof found by you? Questria laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. How convenient. A northern girl finds northern poison, then finds a letter implicating a dead man who cannot defend himself. It sounds like a story woven to hide the truth. Questria turned to the lords, spreading her arms. I propose a test, a trial of truth. If the girl is innocent, let her submit to the moonstone. If she lies, it will burn her to ash. If she speaks truth, she goes free. The moonstone. Odalin felt the blood drain from her face. It was an ancient artifact of the wolf gods, used to judge high crimes. It forced the holder to reveal their deepest secrets, their true nature. If she touched it, it wouldn't just reveal her innocence regarding the poison. It would reveal her lineage as a high omega. It would reveal her suppressed scent. It would reveal the feelings for the king she was barely admitting to herself. No, Merrick said instantly, stepping in front of her. I will not subject her to— I will do it, Odalin interrupted. Merrick grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Odalin, no, you don't know what it does. I know, she whispered to him, her eyes pleading. But if I refuse, they will tear you apart to get to me. They will say you are compromised. They will depose you. She pulled away from him and walked into the center of the circle. Bring the stone. Questria's eyes gleamed with triumph. She signaled a guard, who brought forward a box of polished obsidian. He opened it, revealing a glowing, jagged white crystal that hummed with ancient power. Take it, Questria commanded. Odalin reached out. Her hand hovered over the stone. The air in the hall crackled with ozone and magic. She looked back at Merrick. He was poised to strike, his claws extending, ready to slaughter his own council to stop this. Trust me, she mouthed. She grabbed the stone. Light exploded. A blinding, pure white light that engulfed the room, turning the night into noon. Odalin threw her head back and screamed, not in pain, but in revelation. The suppression herbs in her blood were burned away in an instant by the divine magic. The scent hit the room like a physical wave. Snowdrops, ash, and something else, something powerful, royal, and undeniable. The scent of a true mate. The light faded. Odalin stood panting, the stone pulsing in her hand like a second heart. She was glowing, her skin radiant, her eyes swirling with silver. Questria stumbled back, horror dawning on her face. Impossible. A high omega. Merrick walked forward. He didn't look at the lords. He didn't look at Questria. He moved with the stalking grace of a wolf who has found his other half. He stopped in front of Odalind, inhaling the air that was now thick with her scent. Mine, he growled, the word echoing into the stunned silence, a declaration that shook the foundations of the castle. He turned to the council, his eyes glowing gold. She is not just a cupbearer. She is not just a witness. He bared his teeth at Questria. She is my mate, and anyone who wishes to harm her declares war on me. The echo of Merrick's growl, mine, hung in the great hall like thunder. The mate bond snapped into place, a golden tether connecting Odalin to the Alpha King, flooding her with his fierce protectiveness. The moonstone dimmed, its work done, leaving her palm singing with energy. Questria's face twisted into a snarl. You are bewitched. She has enslaved him. Silence, Merrick roared, the sound vibrating in the stones. He placed a claiming hand on Odalin's shoulder. The stone does not lie. Orion, arrest her for treason. Orion moved, but Questria didn't cower. She pulled a glass sphere filled with red smoke from her bodice and smashed it. A crimson mist exploded outward, screaming with a magical pitch that shattered the windows. "The signal!" Odalin gasped. Outside, the night erupted with the disjointed, rabid howls of hundreds of wolves. Questria grinned through the mist. "The White Fangs are not at the border, Merrick. They are here." "Bed?" Merrick pinned Questria against the door, but it was too late. "I cannot call them off," she choked. "They are hungry." The heavy doors buckled under a battering ram. Merrick threw Questria aside and turned to Odalind, fear wild in his eyes. "The safe room. Go. Now." "No," Odalind said, her feet planted. The bond surged, amplifying the dormant magic in her blood. "I am a frost veil. This is my fight too." The doors exploded inward. The hall became a slaughterhouse. A tide of chemically enhanced rogue wolves poured in. Merrick shifted into a massive black wolf, eyes burning gold, and met the wave with lethal fury. The council lords shifted to join him, a chaotic sea of fur and blood. Odalin stood on the dais, watching the nightmare. When a massive rogue broke the line and lunged for her, she didn't run. She raised the moonstone, channeling her terror into power. "Stop!" A blast of blue-white energy hit the wolf mid-air, freezing him into a jagged block of ice that shattered on impact. "A frostbinder!" Questria shrieked from the balcony. "Kill the witch!" The battle raged. Merrick was a god of war, but the numbers were against them. While he was buried under 3 attackers, Questria threw the lever for the massive iron chandelier above him. "Merrick!" Odalin screamed. He couldn't move in time. Odalin threw herself over the Alpha, slamming the moonstone against the floor. A dome of diamond-hard permafrost erupted from the ground, encasing them both just as tons of iron crashed down. Darkness. Silence. Then, the deep resonance of horns from the courtyard. "The Royal Army!" Merrick choked out, shifting back to human form in the cold dark of the dome. "Drop the shield, Odalind." The ice dissolved. The crash had decimated the White Fang forces, and the fresh royal reserves were mopping up the rest. Questria stood alone, defeated, raising a dagger to her throat. "I will not face the executioner," she spat. "Drop it," Merrick commanded, his alpha voice leaving no room for defiance. Questria's hand spasmed, the blade clattering to the floor as she fell to her knees. "You will face justice," Merrick said, pulling Odalin close. "You will face the kingdom you tried to burn." The aftermath of the battle was a somber affair, but the air was lighter than it had been in years. The storm had broken. The White Fangs were dead or in chains. Questria was in the deepest cell of the Black Keep, awaiting trial for high treason. 3 days later, the great hall had been scrubbed clean. The broken windows were temporarily boarded up, but the sun streamed in through the upper clerestories, bathing the room in golden light. Odalin stood on the balcony of the royal suite, looking out at the recovering city. She wore a gown of silver silk, the crest of House Ravenshaw embroidered over her heart. It still felt surreal. "Thinking of running away?" She turned. Merrick stood in the doorway. He looked healed. Shifter regeneration was a miracle, but he carried a new scar above his eyebrow, a white line that gave him a rugged, dangerous look. "I have nowhere to run," she smiled. "My home is here." Merrick walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "The council is asking for a coronation." "You are already king," Odalin said, leaning into his warmth. "For a queen," he corrected softly. "They want to crown you. Even the old hardliners. They saw what you did. You are the Frostbinder, the first in a century." Odalind looked at her hands. "I am just Odalind, the girl who poured wine." "You are the woman who saved the king." "Twice," Merrick murmured, kissing the side of her neck. "You are the woman who faced down an army with a rock and a prayer. You are my mate." He turned her around so he could look into her eyes. "I don't need a queen for politics, Odalind. I need you. I need the person who saw the man behind the crown, who risked her life when I was nothing but a tyrant to her." "You were never a tyrant to me," she whispered, touching his face. "You were just lost, and you found me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't the heavy, gaudy jewelry of the court. It was a band of white gold, set with a fragment of the moonstone, the piece that had broken off when she saved them. "This doesn't belong in a vault," Merrick said. "It belongs to the one who woke it up." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Odalind Frostvale," Merrick said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you rule with me? Will you heal this broken kingdom by my side?" Odalind looked at the ring, then at the man who held her heart in his hands. The fear of the past, the shame of her hiding, the years of silence, they all evaporated like mist in the morning sun. "Yes," she said, "I will." Merrick didn't wait for a cheer or ceremony. He kissed her, a deep, soul-sealing kiss that promised a future of challenges, yes, but also of unwavering unity. Below them, in the courtyard, the people of Ravensshore looked up and saw their king and his new queen on the balcony. A cheer started, low at first, then swelling into a roar that shook the snow from the trees. It wasn't a cheer of polite obedience, it was a cheer of hope. The winter of Ravensshore was ending. The spring had come, brought by a waitress who dared to switch a cup. The story of Odalind and Merrick became a legend, whispered in every tavern and sung in every nursery of the North. It was a reminder that power is not just claws and crowns. It is the courage to act when no one is watching. It is the strength to stand between a monster and his prey, even when you are trembling. Odalind proved that even the invisible can change the course of history, and that true love is the only magic powerful enough to break the cycle of hate. Fate may deal the cards, poison, betrayal, war, but we choose how to play the hand. And sometimes the winning move is simply to protect the one you love, no matter the cost. Thank you for journeying to Ravensshore with us. If this tale of wolves, magic, and forbidden love captured your heart, please leave a like and share it with your own pack. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic romances that defy the odds. Until next time, may your instincts be sharp and your heart be true.